Asterisk, the quiet of the kitchen was broken only by the sound of water splashing in the sink. A little girl stood on a stool, her tiny frame bent over a pile of dishes that never seemed to end. Her small hands were red and sore, soap suds clinging to her wrists, tears rolling silently down her cheeks. She whispered to herself that her hands hurt, but she dared not stop. She knew the price of pausing, her mother's sharp words that cut deeper than any wound. At only 8 years old, she had been forced into a life where childhood dreams were replaced with endless chores. The sunlight streaming through the window illuminated her damp dress and trembling shoulders. What should have been a day filled with laughter and play had become one more burden to carry. She hadn't always lived this way. Once upon a time, she was lively, painting flowers in bright colors and chasing butterflies across the garden. But those moments now felt like another lifetime. Since the day her parents' marriage began to crumble, her world had shifted. Her mother, obsessed with appearances and social circles, began to lean heavily on her daughter for housework, parties, dresses, cocktails, and gossip mattered more to her than bedtime stories or warm embraces. Meanwhile, the little girl's older brother, only 10, was spared from chores with the excuse that boys weren't meant for such things. He sometimes cast worried glances at his sister, but fear silenced him, and so she stood alone at the sink, plunging her hands into icy water, learning far too early what exhaustion felt like. Their father was a wealthy man, a businessman known for power and success, but to her, he was supposed to be daddy, the one who used to carry her on his shoulders, whisper silly stories at night, and promise her that nothing bad would happen as long as he was near. Those promises now felt distant. His life had become a blur of meetings, contracts, and endless travel. He thought the mansion he built, with its shining furniture and countless rooms, was enough. What he didn't know was that inside those glittering walls, his daughter's laughter had been replaced with sobs. That afternoon, as her fingers ached against the porcelain plates, her mother swept into the room in a glittering gown, preparing for yet another evening out. When the little girl whispered timidly that her hands hurt, her mother snapped at her to stop complaining and keep working. Her brother sat at the table, laying forks with trembling hands, his heart aching but his voice trapped. And then everything shifted. The sound of the front door unlocking sent a wave of tension through the house. Their father had returned earlier than expected. He stepped inside with his usual air of authority, his briefcase swinging, his suit pressed to perfection. But the moment he reached the kitchen doorway, his steps halted. What he saw froze him in place. His daughter standing on tiptoe, dress damp, hands red and raw from scrubbing, shoulders quivering as she tried to stifle her sobs. His wife, towering behind her, barked harsh words instead of offering comfort. His son sat silently, his face clouded with helplessness. The sight pierced his heart like never before. For years he had worked tirelessly, thinking that money and comfort were enough. But now, staring at his daughter's fragile form, he realized he had been blind to the most important thing of all, his presence. What use was his fortune if his little girl was breaking under burdens no child should ever know? He set down his briefcase slowly, his jaw tightening, anger burning hotter than any confrontation in a boardroom. His voice was calm, but unshakable as he asked his wife why their daughter was washing dishes instead of laughing, playing, and simply being a child. She stammered, scrambling for excuses about discipline and responsibility, but his face showed no trace of agreement. He walked straight to the sink, gently taking his daughter's hands into his own. The roughness of her small palms nearly broke him. Kneeling to her level, he whispered softly, telling her she no longer had to do this, that he was home now, and everything was about to change. That evening, the house was filled with something it hadn't heard in months: laughter. The father served dinner himself, insisting his children eat freely, talk, and smile. His daughter's lips curved into a small but genuine smile, hesitant at first, then blossoming as she felt the warmth of her father's attention. Once again, days that followed were far from easy. Confrontations with his wife grew sharper, as she clung to excuses about teaching discipline and maintaining order. But he had already made a decision that no argument could shake. He would never again allow wealth or social appearances to stand above the happiness of his children. Step by step, he began to rebuild his life. Meetings were rescheduled, late-night calls shortened, business trips declined. Evenings once spent in offices and hotels were now devoted to the dinner table, bedtime stories, and long walks in the garden. Slowly, he discovered that the true measure of his success was not in the contracts he signed or the titles he earned, but in the laughter echoing through his home. His daughter, once weighed down by endless chores, began to bloom again. Freed from scrubbing sinks and floors, she returned to her love of painting. Bright rainbows, flowers, and sunlit skies began to fill the house. Her father proudly framed her drawings, hanging them in places where expensive art had once been displayed. Each picture was more than paint on paper. It was a piece of her childhood being restored. Her brother, too, began to flourish. With his father's guidance, he found the courage to speak more openly, to share his dreams, and to protect his sister with pride. For the first time, both children felt what it meant to have a father fully present in their lives. But the greatest transformation was in the little girl herself. No longer did she cry at the sink or whisper through tears that her hands hurt. Instead, her laughter filled the garden as she ran barefoot across the grass, her small hands clutching paintbrushes or reaching for her father's steady grasp. Each shared moment became a balm, slowly erasing the scars of the past. Life was not perfect. Her mother often clashed with her father, unable to accept the changes, but he stood firm. He had realized that kindness mattered more than appearances, that being there mattered more than being wealthy. He became the father his children had always longed for, and in doing so, he discovered a joy far deeper than any success in the outside world. The story of a little girl forced to wash dishes until her hands ached became the story of a father's awakening. It was a lesson that love cannot be replaced by wealth, that presence is more powerful than gifts, and that sometimes the greatest changes occur when the heart finally opens its eyes. So let this story remind us all, sometimes all it takes is a father walking through the door at the right time, choosing never again to let his child cry alone,